Beverly Ayling-Smith is a textile artist and researcher. Beverly examines the emotional states of mourning and melancholia and focuses on the emotions of grief, loss, and absence using techniques such as the mending and staining of cloth. Using a textured monotone palette and materials traditionally used for burial such as linen, lead, and sheets, Beverly describes bed sheets as acting as silent witnesses to many of the natural processes in life, from birth to death. Her work explores how she can imbue cloth with emotion and make a connection with the viewer to allow reflection and consideration of the losses we have all experienced. Beverly has a PhD, an MA in Contemporary Crafts, a BA in Embroidered Textiles, and is a member of the Society of Designer Craftsmen. She's had solo shows and exhibitions across the UK, Europe, Canada, the US, and Japan, and has presented her research to conferences around the globe on the topic of cloth, loss, and memory, and the language of grief in textile art practice. As Professor Leslie Miller observed, Beverly's work locates a feeling, an emotion, in a material object. The work touches us, causes us to stop and look carefully at the surfaces, and in doing so, we connect to the losses we have all experienced. So let's find out more and say hello to Beverly, who joins us from the UK today, and you, wherever you are. If you are joining us live, please leave a comment and let us know where you are in the world. If you are catching up on a replay, we hope you enjoy the conversation and share it with your friends. So without further ado, let's welcome Beverly Ayling-Smith, our 60th Friday feature artist. Hello, Beverly, and welcome.
Thank you very much. Greetings from a very cold but sunny Cotswolds.
Yes, and it's our last day of kind of summertime here, but it's been raining for about 7 weeks, so it's felt quite a long time since we've actually had summer. And hello to everyone. We've already got quite a few people joining us tonight, so that's this morning, today, now, which is fabulous. So I'll just pop those up so you can see who's here.
Wow, lovely.
And hello to everybody joining us. Fabulous. From all over the globe. Excellent. Yes. So, well, amazing. That work is just incredible, and I can't wait to find out more about all of your process. So I was interested in what came first, the textiles or the research. But chatting to you yesterday, you mentioned your science background and previous life or career as a microbiologist. Can you tell us what area you worked in, and if the scientific approach or method is evident in the way that you work now?
Yes, that was in a previous life, quite a long time ago. But when I left school and went to university, I studied microbiology, and I ended up working in antibiotic research for Beecham Pharmaceuticals in Surrey. And then later I worked at the Central Public Health Laboratory in Colindale in North London, where I worked on hospital-acquired infection. So we would test if there was lots of people with the same infection on a ward, we would type the strain and find out whether it was actually the same thing or it was just coincidence. And if it was, if it was the same thing, then we had to find the source, the equipment, or the things that were going wrong that caused an outbreak. So it was all to do with infection control. And I do credit my science background with the way I work, because my sketchbooks resemble experiment books, really. I create samples, I have ideas, and I put them in my book, and then I write comments in of what to try next, and sometimes I find myself completing a series of sort of experimental pieces, not because they're any better than the ones that I did before, but they're on my list, and it's all the different variations and the different things to try. So yes,
I love that idea of experiments.
I think of them more as experiments than samples.
Yes, and later on we've got a video where you show sort of a sample, and so that idea of experiments in the sort of, what we think of as a scientific process, but then also then becoming samples in a textile process does sound quite fascinating.
I was doing some work recently where I had to, there was a certain process that I was doing that I couldn't, that was new to me, and I couldn't quite make it work. And so I just had to, I was screen printing and adding things on the top of that. And so in the end, I just went back to, right, I'll do one for 5 minutes, one for 6 minutes, one for 7 minutes, one for, so that I could actually pinpoint exactly the right amount of time that I needed. But I think that's where that comes from.
Yes, that does take me back to my science lessons at high school and testing things, testing things and making notes. Yes. So I was interested, obviously we're going to talk about cloth in the broader sense and this idea of cloth as memory and having memory. But I was wondering, do you hoard your own items, or what's the earliest memory of a piece of cloth that meant something to you?
Oh, that's a tricky one.
I know.
I do have a collection. Yes, I do.
Children have that bit of cloth and they sleepwalk onto.
Yes, I didn't have a blanket. I had we made some friends and we had, it was called Ollie Beak. It was I don't know where that came from, but it was like a little toy that we used to, we all had one, but they were ones that we'd made where we'd cut up a bit of blanket or something and stitched a face on it. So that was a really early thing. I've still got it actually, but I don't think I could throw that away. But I've also got I've got a box in the attic called Beverly's Sentimental Clothing.
Ooh, does it say keep out underneath?
And it's the favourite little outfits from my children really, and they're like slippers or first shoe or something. Yeah, so I do have that collection, but I wouldn't use that in my work. I couldn't. I did go to when I was looking at a child's dress, I was using that in my work, and I went to a charity shop and found one, and I was with my daughter at the time, who must have been about 16, and we found this really cute little dress, and the lady in the shop when I bought it said, "Oh, I can't wait to see what the little girl's going to look like in that." And as we were leaving, my daughter looked at me and she said, "She doesn't know you're going to burn it or bury it or rip it. Don't say anything."
Step away.
Yes.
Well, we are going to get to some of your images quite soon, and also I guess begin with melancholia, which is interesting on a Friday night. But we've got lots to discuss, so we won't get too sad. So the subject of your PhD looked at how cloth can be a metaphor for loss, how it can connect with the viewer, and that's obviously been an overarching theme for your practice. So I was interested in what led you to undertake that particular theme for your PhD, and did you have other contenders for possible topics or?
No, not really. I mean, I when I was doing my MA, towards the end, I came across Freud's writing. I was looking at, in my MA, I was looking at sort of private versus public rituals, the different things that people undertake when they're at home, or the sort of the more ceremonial aspects of remembrance. But then I came across Freud's book, his essay he wrote on mourning and melancholia. And I just felt, that was probably in the last 6 months of my MA, and I just really felt that was something that I wanted to pursue, but it was going to be a much deeper, more complicated investigation. So, so while I was finishing my MA, I was also applying for my PhD. But that was really where that came from. It wasn't, oh, I want to do a PhD, what can I do it on? It was more, I found this research, and for me, the textile element of my practice came first, and then I found that I enjoyed the research so much that I ended up doing these ridiculous number of degrees.
So I have this piece here. So is this part of the piece that you're referring to in those initial studies or investigations?
Yes, that's right. So this was my first piece that I made, trying to capture that sort of emotion. So that's black Holland linen and lead. It's been waxed. I started using quite a lot of waxed fabric because of the cerecloth that was a waxed cloth that was put over the face in the Middle Ages. Oh. So I used wax cloth quite a lot. But that piece actually was, it was bought by somebody who bought it for her therapist because it, for her, showed what she felt like when she was bipolar. And she thought that really showed how she felt when she was in her depression phase. So that I felt that was actually quite a good, well, in a way, a sort of a measure of success that, you know, that it showed what she was feeling.
Yeah, incredible. I also have this piece, remembering, repeating, and working through. Did that follow on from
yes,
the other
yes.
piece?
I wanted to. I'm sorry. It's 5 meters by 3 meters, so it's really quite difficult to photograph. And the fact that it's black, it's not very helpful. But yes, that sort of followed on. That comes from Freud. If we can do a little bit of Freud on a Friday night, he said that when someone dies, you mentally hold up these memories and images of the person, and that enables you to come to terms with the fact that they're not there. So you think about them and you say, okay, they're not here anymore. And also events that haven't happened yet that you sort of plan to do with them, that they were going to be there for, they now won't happen. And it's this constant remembering, repeating, and working through of memories that means that you can detach your libido, your life force, from the person, and then everything's okay and you can move on.
Oh, and I had from Angela Ollie Beek.
Oh, that's where it comes from. Do you know, I never knew that. Thank you, Angela.
Thanks, Angela. Yes. So going on from what we were just speaking about, and so then also another piece to do with memory is the wall of memory and the letters that are hidden behind the fabric. Were the letters something that you owned, or can you tell us more about that?
So the number 7 is used quite a lot in my work because I went through a bit of a bad time a few years ago now, 2009, I think, 2010. And I had a phase of about 2 months when 7 people I knew died, not connected in any way, but it was just a really awful sort of time. And they ranged from close friends to distant relatives I'd never met. And it was just like this. I got to the point where I thought, I just don't want to pick up the phone anymore, you know, because it was just bad news. So I use the number 7, and those letters are from some of those 7 that they had written to me in the past. And it's just using the number 7, just for me, just sort of honors their memory, and, you know, keeps them in my mind. So, yeah.
And so do you, I mean, it sounds like it, do you think that art does have the power to heal, and for the maker as well as the viewer?
Oh, yes, I think so. Definitely. I mean, we often resort to looking at favourite paintings or visiting favourite galleries or something when in bad times, I think. And I think, you know, looking at a painting or a piece of work can make you feel better, can't it? And I think for the artist as well, sometimes it's a way of working that through. for yourself. And a lot of the work I do is repetitive stitch, and so it's a long process of doing, and to me, making in quiet is very important. So where I live is very quiet. My studio, when some things I'm doing, I can have music on or the radio on, whatever. But if I'm actually focused, I need to do that in the quiet.
So I have a little bit of the
yes,
background.
That's my studio on the left, and my house on the right. And this is the view out of my window this morning.
Gorgeous.
So, yes, we're just in the Cotswolds, in the countryside. Moved here a couple of years ago from Berkshire because it was all very busy and noisy and not going to get any better. So we thought, let's run away to the countryside.
And so you have included your studio in all its glory here.
Yes, so this was shortly after moving in. And so hence the boxes. But now we've got cupboards and storage. And yes, it's all very messy. I tidy up a bit this morning. So.
Yes, I was going to ask you how you did relax or unwind and whether meditative stitching is the key to that.
Yes, I think it is actually. And, I unwind by being outside in the countryside. That was the great thing about lockdown and being in a new area. We had to walk. We couldn't go out in the car. So we found so many lovely footpaths and areas here that we didn't know were here. So yeah, it was a good time.
And when I look at work like this, which is your mendings, and I just sort of think, it seems very ordered, and where do you think the aesthetical way of working comes from? And are you a very organized and ordered person?
Well, having seen the image of my studio just now,
I know, I was refreshed with that.
Not very ordered, but no, I am reasonably methodical, and I like straight lines. So I think particularly with that mendings piece, the pieces on the little tiles were only sort of this big. They were the size of a small UK postage stamp.
Okay.
And so because they were small, I put them on the tiles so that each one had a significant presence. Each one had to be an entity in its own right. So yeah, there are 7 different sorts of mending there. So on that piece, there are 333 tiles. And the size of the background is my height by my sort of width, my sort of, it's like a sort of a squared off body size. So yes, I do work in a fairly organized and methodical way, but I do make an awful mess as well.
And I sort of had this vision of you working in a sort of monastic existence in silence in this sort of cave. So it was refreshing to see that your studio. But yeah, do you find that are you listening to anything while you're working, or is it you are completely into that zone?
No, sometimes I listen to music, just put on something random, or a chill selection, or something on Spotify. But for the most part, it has to be done. I just find I focus better. And also I can be then thinking about the next piece, or I think it helps for me to get that emotion in there if there's a certain amount of focus and dedication to what you're actually doing, rather than listening to something else at the same time.
So I guess in the last 2 years, I mean, obviously everybody has an experience of grief and loss anyway, just by living. But particularly in the last 2 years, we've globally experienced the same thing together in different ways. So looking at your 12 weeks of isolation, I was wondering if you could tell us more about how the thinking process begins. I mean, how did you sort of approach each square? Was there an abstract gesture or literal translation of the thought or mood for the day? Like those stitches are less ordered. And was that sort of cathartic for you?
Yes, it was. It was done every day, and it was an unconscious decision, really. I just had to do something, and something very small, obviously. I had to do something every day because it was such a bad time. And I had the fabric and I had the squares, which I made right at the beginning. I just made a big pile of things. And then I decided I would go in and do one every day. And it was to do with my mood. It was definitely to do with my mood. It was just, did I want to, make, zigzags, or, was I going around in circles? Was I wanting to put in a little bit of repetitive stitch, or, it was all to do with how I was feeling at the time.
Now, I did just have a question from Marilyn going back to the mending. Are the pieces glued onto the tiles?
Yeah, they are stuck on. Yeah.
Great. Okay, thank you. Right. Oh, so the idea of the vocabulary in your work and this use of the 7. And so I've got this piece here. And is that the one where you use the hospital bed sheets?
Yes, that's right. So actually, the other one, there were 3. That's the one. That was where I showed it first. That was in Salts Mill, and that was opposite that big wall. Remembering, repeating, and working through. But these are 7 hospital bed sheets that were found. I managed to obtain. They were found in a bunker in France after the Second World War, and I managed to get hold of them. And my father-in-law was wounded in France shortly after D-Day, and spent 2 years in hospital. Some of that in France. So to find these unused Second World War field hospital bed sheets was really quite a significant thing. So that's why I use those. The ones that are piled up on the floor aren't. They are just second-hand bed sheets. But the 7 are the significant ones.
And was this another variation of the work at a different place?
Yes. So this was at the Crypt Gallery in St Pancras in London. And it is a crypt under a church. So it was just very atmospheric to have them there. And the third image with them, that's in the James Hockey Gallery at the University in Farnham. That was my PhD that was one side of my PhD exhibition. And, just loved the way that ended up. That was a really fortuitous placing, the way we worked a long time on the lighting for that. And what I didn't realise until someone pointed it out, actually, was that it looked like hospital bays, with the curtains.
Oh, yes.
So that was a really lovely observation by somebody.
And I was wondering too, like the choice of the location and how much does the atmosphere contribute to how your work is experienced? And do you get to document or research how people are experiencing it? Do they sort of feed that back to you?
Yes, I mean, it is very difficult, particularly, with the subject matter. But I do find if I'm there, people will often want to come and talk to me and tell me their story, which is lovely. But I think even more significant is, even if I'm not there, people will sometimes email me. They'll go to the bother of finding my contact details and email me and tell me what they think, which is absolutely wonderful. to actually bother to do that, I think is I feel it's a great privilege to hear their story, and if my work has made them think differently or has helped in any way, then that's something to treasure.
And Vicky has a question that it was intriguing me too, that this idea of the very monochrome palette, but also does the idea of black for mourning in the Western world and white in the Eastern world come into your work?
Yes, it has done, because it is an interesting difference, isn't it? But I went to India a few years ago and was talking to some women there about mourning and everything, and they took me to a sari shop and pointed out to me all the different ones that were used for women to wear when they were widowed, and they gave me some, and I did actually make a piece of work. I don't have an image of that, I'm afraid, but it was a sort of a cone standing on its point. And it was made from strips that I tore from the sari, and it was done in a sort of a spiral. The strips were about 1 centimetre wide, and I machine stitched them together and made a sort of a wire framework. And then as you reach the point, so the white was then stained until the bottom of it was completely black. So yeah,
wow.
so I have used that, but I was looking at the idea of Julia Kristeva's idea of the abyss of sorrow. So I was just sort of trying to go down into the vortex.
Amazing. So you mentioned before that idea there of tearing, and when you and I were chatting, we were talking about sort of the cathartic nature of shredding and tearing. So could you tell us a little bit more about, I think this is the larger piece, torn.
Yes, this is shredded, this piece, and it it really was. That was how I was feeling during lockdown, and it was a great release, really, to go in the studio every morning and tear, just rip. It's cotton sheet that's been dyed black, and it just did me an awful lot of good to just go in and just rip and rip and rip, and yeah, made me feel a lot better. But I felt shredded. It was a bad time, and to do that, and I just felt I just need to hold these down in some way, all these fragments, and just try and I was going to tidy it up, and I decided in the end that I needed to leave all those threads hanging because it just added to the way I was feeling.
And so at the time, that was a piece for an exhibition that you weren't sure was going to go ahead.
Yes,
because of
that's
lockdown?
right. Yes, that's right. So it was cancelled. I'd actually, the gallery is in Stroud, which is not far from where I live, but I booked it before we moved. So it was going to be an awful long way away for us anyway. But then we moved, and then lockdown, and I didn't know what was going to happen. And then at one point they said, well, you can put the exhibition up on your own, but you can't have anyone in. So you'll just have to film it or document it in some way, so that you can say that it's happened. But I really wasn't that happy. But then restrictions lifted, and so we could actually have the exhibition.
Which segues me nicely to the video that I'm about to play, interestingly enough. So we have this beautiful video by Ethan Roberts. So we couldn't not share it because it's just another sort of facet to your whole story. So I'm going to play that now, and that goes for 5 minutes. So we'll be back with Beverly just after this video. Wrong one.
So this piece was laid out and painted with bitumen and left to dry outside to trial and see how I could make it really intense. This has actually made it solidify quite a bit, and actually lifting it off the backing, I have an unintended happy accident of a beautiful print here. Fabric is our second skin, that's how as people describe clothing. But to me, this whole cloth thing is skin. It is. It's the reason I tear and mend is to do with our experience of life events. It's like this is the fabric of my being. Things happen in life, they make a mark on you, internally, externally, and this is a way of representing that, I think. In these pieces, I've stitched down some printed letters from a friend, and I wanted it to appear really embedded in the surface, like something that you find within a wall. Here is how the piece starts, with the printing and the stitch, and then I've used different things to cover over and then rub back. So this one is paint and polyfiller, and this one, it's quite fine grains of chalk that I got from a quarry, and then just sprinkling over the top. So it's a case of concealing and revealing. And how much of each one of those do you want to do? Do you want to obliterate, or do you just want to have a suggestion of what might be hidden behind? I think it's easier to understand with hand stitch, that particularly if something is covered with an awful lot of stitching, they can get a sense of that quiet and of that sort of putting the needle in and drawing the thread through, putting the needle in, drawing the thread through, that sort of repetitive, calming thing. It's something to do with only focusing on one thing, shutting out everything else, and going with the rhythm. I think it's to do with the rhythm as much as anything. This is a sort of illustration of the joy of the unpredictable. So this is a piece that I've stitched and mended and painted, but I painted this side, but then because of the surface it was on, when you actually turn it over, you get a really interesting texture to the way the bitumen has been applied, but you don't know that until it's dried and you're able to turn it over. In other pieces, I have then torn it into pieces and then reconstructed it with raised seams and imposed a structure to it. So this is a piece made as a sample for the piece Wall of Memory that's in the exhibition, and I wanted to try and recreate the gaps between stones in the wall, and so I applied paper. I pinned paper in place and again painted with bitumen, and because there were some gaps between the pieces of paper, when I then turned it over, these lovely marks appeared, and I was able to incorporate some stitch, which then made it look as though it was part of a wall. I've wanted to go back to the wall for a long time, and internal walls, internal barriers, we put up to protect ourselves, but actually you need to be able to have some seepage in and seepage out, which is why I have the gaps and the mends and the incomplete mends, because nothing is then completely closed off.
Wow, that is, I almost feel like we just do need a moment to pause. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. That's incredible. And so many amazing things that come out of that, if just for the joy of unpredictability. I love that.
I find in my work a lot of the time I do things, and I do quite a lot of intense stitching or something that takes quite a long time, and then I for some reason decide to subject it to possible chaos by, you know, leaving it outside or covering it with chalk or bitumen or something, ash. You know, it's this balance between something that is very ordered, as you were saying earlier, you know, something very ordered, and I like straight lines. I find myself counting threads quite a lot, and with the bed sheets that's quite difficult because they're so fine, so I have to use a magnifying light and
the actual thread count.
Yes,
doing
and then I go and you know, throw ash over it and see what happens. And all that work, you know, and you think, oh, please work.
So the use of bitumen, that was interesting to me because it's quite stinky. And so I was thinking the process of adding another sensory dimension to something. I mean, do you just love working with it, or how did that come about that you decided to open a tin of bitumen?
Yes, that was during my PhD, and it was to do with the stickiness of it. I don't know if you've ever worked with it, but once you open that tin and you start sticking a brush, it gets everywhere. You can't get rid of it.
People leave the room.
Yes, and how once you've got it on your hands, it goes everywhere. You know, I mean, you get smudges of it all over the place where you don't want it. Even if you wear gloves, it just somehow you turn around and it's on the back of your chair. You know, I mean, it's just, I don't know how it happens. But I sort of used it as a sort of the stickiness of grief, really, that it's really hard to sort of shake it off. So that's how that started. And then I found that as much as anything, when you use it in its sort of more sort of diluted form, it just has such a wonderful range of colours.
It's a favourite used in printmaking. Just like to acknowledge that the video was amazing. Thank you, Madeline.
Thank you.
Yeah, Ava, Angela. So yes, that was
great. Thank you.
Gorgeous.
I shall pass that on to Ethan.
Yes, absolutely. So words like fold, drape, stitch, stain, tear. I mean, when did you become conscious of fabric having its own vocabulary? And was it something that you're always conscious of and aware of? I mean, no, stain is so evocative.
Yes, I don't think so. I think it's something that, you know, through the research, you know, became more apparent. I think I think the fantastic thing about textile art is that we are so used to experiencing cloth. I mean, there is very little time in our lives when we're not actually in contact with it. And I mean, I think in the bath or the shower is about the only time. And because we have this experience, this intense experience of cloth, we know how it feels, we know how it works, and we have memories associated with it in all sorts of different ways, not just sad ways, joyous ways too. And so when you see a piece of textile art in a gallery, you intuitively know what that's going to feel like, how it's going to feel in your hands, or how it's going to drape, or why it drapes in the way that it does. And I think that's what makes it so accessible. You know, when it's in an art form, it's so much more accessible to the viewer, I think, as to what it's actually trying to say.
So this idea of the viewer connecting to your work, but for their own reasons, and that it's more of a signpost for them to stop, to pause, consider, and reflect on their own experience rather than you doing the storytelling. So did this evolve in your work, or was it always your intention for it not to be about you? Which kind of leads me to the question of, have there ever been occasions where people have read more into a work that wasn't actually there?
Yes, I think it is difficult to, it's your creation, and you've made it for a reason, and then you put it on the wall or in a gallery, and people misinterpret it or don't understand it or whatever. And to a certain extent, you have to let that go, because you can't be standing over everyone saying this is what it means and this is what you take from it and all that sort of thing. But it is a bit difficult when people don't. So I made a series of works, as I said, with a child's dress in it, because I was looking at
image.
Yes, so that's called The Resonance of Loss. And I was thinking about the loss of childhood, because I was thinking about children leaving home and all that kind of thing. And several people asked me if I'd had a miscarriage, which I haven't. And I didn't want to give that impression. I mean, I did say, the information, you often have an artist statement on the wall next to the work in a mixed show. And it specifically said that I was thinking about the loss of childhood, but people don't always read the information, and so they take away their own interpretation. And in the end, I decided not to use the child's dress anymore because it was misleading. And despite what I had written and said, some people just, frankly, didn't believe me. But I didn't want to give a false impression and look as though I was claiming something that I hadn't. So that's changed. And also the Wall of Memory piece, when that was shown in the gallery. So that's 2 meters 70 by 1 meter 75. It is a whole bed sheet. And someone came in the gallery and gave me quite a hard time that I was using poverty and homelessness as a way of producing my work, and that I shouldn't be highlighting issues like that in a gallery. But that absolutely was not what that piece was about. And so, I had, obviously the person hadn't read any of the information in the gallery again, so I took him over to it and I showed him how it had been made and what it was made from. And we had a good talk about it all, and we left as friends. It was all fine. But yes, it's interesting when you are there and people misinterpret. What can you do? You can only put the information on the wall and hope that people read it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm interested in this piece too, because it's quite detailed. Can you explain a little bit more about the thoughts on process behind that?
So that's a pillowcase that has been opened out, and you can see the flap at the top, I think. So yes, this was a set of pillowcases that I was given by a friend who she had inherited a whole collection from her family, but had moved house and just didn't have room for them anymore, and so gave me all her family linen, which was a fabulous gift. So just under the flap, on the right hand side, sort of 2/3 of the way up, you can see one of the monograms, which I've just sort of highlighted slightly. It's sort of like an oval shape because it's on its side. I don't know if you can see that. And so I was just thinking about pillowcases witness so much, and I was just I called this piece Legacy because it was the inherited pillowcases from this friend, and again it uses lead as well. So it was just, I was just thinking about all the things that a pillowcase witnesses and sort of going inside the pillowcase to see what's there.
And you mentioned lead. Was lead also in this piece? Or?
So that piece is 8 foot by 5 foot, and it's covered with, yes, you see, I keep making work that's really difficult to photograph.
From postage stamp to your own height.
Yes. So this is 8 foot by 5 foot, and it's a calico background, and it's got rose petals that I ironed and embedded in the bitumen, and then they're all stitched down with silk thread, apart from 7 which have lead wire that I made to hold those down.
Wow, that's incredible. Yes, ironing rose petals, that takes on another
form
of meditation, doesn't it?
Absolutely. You know, those things that you think were a good idea at the time, and then you actually have to do them all. Yes.
And so, speaking of time, you've got this piece incredible as well.
Yes. Again, so this is a bedsheet size. This came about because towards the end of my PhD, I was told I couldn't do any more making and I had to concentrate on writing. So after a very fair and frank exchange of views, I negotiated that I could do something every day to save my sanity. And so I decided, so these are the death notices that are printed in the newspaper that tell people when the funeral service is and that sort of thing. And so I printed them onto fabric and then tore them up and stitched them down. It's called One Day at a Time, and it was to do with, you know, sometimes you just have to do a small thing to get through the day.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, it's quite important. And I found that this was my one day at a time, just getting through. So I did it every day from October 2015 to October 2016, and it's shown flat because a lot of the death notices say that someone passed peacefully in their sleep or just peacefully, and it was interesting because printing them, tearing them up, stitching them down, I felt as if I got to know the people slightly. And it was just because, you know, each one took a while to stitch. So I was reading the notices quite closely as well. So it was and then actually my father-in-law died while I was sort of in the middle of making that piece, and it was his job to cut the death notices out of his newspaper. He'd send them to me in the post every week, and so we decided that we would have his name put in the paper, and then I cut that out and I put that in as well. My husband said to me, are you going to stitch it any differently? Are you going to edge it, or, you know, do something else on it so that you know where it is? And I said, no, I think it's important that he's just one of many, you know, and I know roughly where he is in the piece, but it's just important that, you know, this is going on all the time. And that's why towards the end of the piece, the bottom bit of the piece, the death notices aren't stitched down. Some of them are pinned in place and some of them are just scattered, because it's a continuing process.
Oh, I see. Yes. Absolutely. So I do have a question here from Anita, who would like to ask you if the relationship changes with the materials once the work is finished and exhibited, as it's so much here about the process.
Yes, I suppose it does, really. I think it's always important to sit and consider the work when it is on, because we don't see it hanging up in a gallery space when we're making, or even when the work's finished. Sometimes I don't necessarily have room to hang up a 2.70 by 1.75 piece you know, so I do feel it's important to have a sort of conversation with it when it's actually hanging up and on show. And I think sometimes I think all artists are like this, actually, but I think sometimes you look at a piece of work that you've spent a long time making and you think, oh, where did that come from? You know, sometimes it's quite a revelation when you and you know, when you see pieces of work that you haven't looked at for a while and you sort of get them out, and it's yes.
In the video before, you were talking about that idea of building a wall, and I was thinking about the notion of building barriers and against hurt, and this idea of being vulnerable, because I've heard you mention and refer to Brené Brown, who talks about the power of vulnerability. As the weight of the world falls quite heavy at the moment, I was also wondering how you personally build strength or resilience, you know, when you're continually looking at all these subjects.
Yes, it's not. Yes, I find it. It's. How can I say this? I'm not. It's not that I am massively grieving myself. What I'm focusing on is, obviously, we don't get to this age without experiencing death or bereavement, but it informs my work, but it's not about me. And what I'm actually focusing on is the progress. It's the healing, and it's the making better and moving on side of things that I'm looking at. So I'm not sort of wallowing in this eternal, you know, sadness. What my work is about more is about acknowledging that and then making it better. It's the healing process for me that is the important thing, I think.
And I also heard that you mentioned Jenny Sorkin and the idea that cloth holds the sometimes unbearable gift of memory. Yes. And I wondered if you'd heard of Australian textile artist Mary Burgess, who is Mary Handweaver on Instagram, because she takes old or precious family textiles and uses them to weave a memory cloth for the future. So that's a connection with the past, but it's also a piece that then develops a history of its own.
Yes.
And that idea of the process of weaving with torn strips, that something new can be woven within us. And I just think that's also lovely. A beautiful way.
Absolutely. I think Jenny Sorkin's writing is wonderful. It's just a different way of thinking about it, really. I just, it is, which is why I think textiles are uniquely placed to be used in artwork. You know, it is, to me, the most important material to use because it holds so much in terms of emotion, memory. It's just,
Yeah. And so this has been fabulous, and we're nearly up to an hour already.
Oh gosh.
I know, it's amazing. And so if anyone does have some questions, please get in there quick with them. But I know that
Jenny Sorkin.
Yes.
Jenny Sorkin. Sorkin.
And as we were chatting, that you've got an exhibition in Kyoto at the moment, and I just wondered, I've got a piece here from that. Could you just tell us how that came about and what this represents?
Yes, so this is very small. It's 5 centimeters by 5 centimeters by 4, and it when we did a study trip to Japan in 2019. And we visited the Kanazawa Gold Museum. And one of the exhibits there was how they used to make the gold leaf and make it really thin in times gone by. They had paper with the gold sheets in between, and they would literally bash it with a hammer. And they had these beautiful artifacts in the museum of these bundles of paper wrapped in leather. And it just intrigued me that the gold was on the inside and you couldn't see it. And the old leather was on the outside, protecting it from the hammers. And so I decided to invert that and have the lead on the inside, really thin sheets that I rolled, and then bound that with painted silk that had been screen printed with some actual gold leaf on the surface. So it's also plays on the idea of, because the pieces were supposed to be held in the hand because of the hand gestures in Japan. So important. So the pieces had to be no more than 15 centimeters in any direction so that it could be held, in the hand. But because this is lead, it sort of subverts that, because the lead is toxic. But there's also the link with alchemy, with the changing lead into gold. So that's what that piece was all about.
Another bit.
I really wanted one of those bundles in the museum. I really.
So I've nearly gone through all my questions and photos, which is fantastic. But I was just wondering, does the work always say what you want it to? And do you persist or abandon it if it goes off track?
Yes, I do. It depends. It depends to what extent. Sometimes I do give up on some things because they're just not saying what I want them to say, or they aren't particularly pleasing to me. They're not what I was trying to do, and they do get put under the table. But sometimes things have to get worse before they get better. And I think if you have a certain way that you think it's going to be, sometimes it gets to a point where it's either give up or you really have to push through, and it will get there in the end. Yeah,
that's really interesting, that moment of, and it's almost kind of like you have to trust, don't you, that if you push through, that something will happen, because it's a leap of faith that you've been there before, and you have to trust.
Absolutely. And particularly when you're starting as well, sometimes you think, oh, this is never going to work, but you just have to, well, that's because you haven't done enough yet. So
fantastic.
And then there's knowing when to stop, which is a whole other
when your body can't go on any longer, or you need to eat. I'm just waiting for that moment where you can get something from the ceiling in a tube and get some sustenance, so you don't. People are horrified when I say that, because food is such a delightful process, but I'm like, no, I need it.
Yes, I just need energy, that's all.
Exactly. Yes. Well, this has been fabulous, and we've just covered so much, and I just thank you so much for your time and sharing.
It's been lovely talking to you.
Processes and everything with us. So it's almost time to finish. So if anybody, I'd love to just get all your responses of gratitude for Beverly, and if you've enjoyed the last hour of chatting, so if you can post your comments in the comments below, that would be fabulous. Meanwhile, so what are you working on now, and what are you looking forward to?
Well, I'm looking forward to getting my studio back, actually, because whilst we are in it now, we have actually been living here because we're having a lot of work done on the house, and so it has now become our home. So I've had to have some kitchen units put in at the back here, which are screened off. But it does mean that I haven't actually been doing very much textile work, which has been interesting because there are now some burning pieces that I really need to do. And it's been really interesting. If you can't make, what is the most important thing that you're going to do first now? So,
and do you know what that is?
I think so. Yes.
And is it massive?
Yeah.
And does it involve lots of tiny little bits?
Well,
that are going to take a long time?
I think because my space has been so restricted, the only thing I can think of that I want to do is huge. Yes. As a reaction, yes.
Fabulous. Okay, well, I think that covers everything. So Beverly, thanks again. If you just stay there for a moment and I'll just play our outro and post up everybody's comments. And yes, it's been wonderful despite the weather out there. I'm sure it must be sunny somewhere in the world, but it's certainly not in Sydney or perhaps in the UK. So yes, thank you everyone. It's been wonderful, and thank you, Beverly.
Thank you.